In 1936, two professional photographers hired by Country Life magazine, one of the most respectable publications in Britain, took a photograph of a stately home in Norfolk. One of them looked through the viewfinder at the main staircase, and he saw something that shouldn't have been there. He screamed at his colleague to take the picture. The photograph was developed, published, and it has never been fully explained. That image is still considered the most famous ghost photograph ever taken. The house is still standing, and it's never been open to the public. That's number 2 on today's list. Stay with me. We've covered 15 haunted locations across the UK in the previous video, 15 things that go bump in the night. And we're not done yet, because Britain doesn't run out of ghost stories. It never has. We start in South Wales, with a building that does something that I find genuinely interesting. It's a Tudor manor house, Grade 1 listed, built in 1530, and it operates as a living history museum. The guides walk around in period costume as if it's the year 1645. They stay in character all day, which means when you ask about the ghosts, the answer is always given by someone dressed as a 17th century servant. Lancaig Fowler Manor sits in the Rhymney Valley near Caerphilly. It was built by a Welsh nobleman in the 1530s, and by the time of the English Civil War, it had become a place of enormous political significance. King Charles I himself visited the house in 1645, just a few years before he was captured, tried, and executed. Today, the manor is frozen at that moment. Every guide, every interaction is set in 1645. You are a visitor to the household. The war is happening somewhere out there, and the household has its own concerns. Those concerns, visitors report, including things that move on their own, cold spots with no draft to explain them, a male figure in royalist dress seen in certain rooms, then gone. A woman's form on the staircase, there one moment and not the next. The kitchen is particularly active, and the upper rooms. Staff who stay late have heard sounds they couldn't account for. There's something layered about this one that I like. You walk into the building where everyone is already pretending to be from another century, and then you start to wonder, what if some of the people you're seeing aren't pretending at all? Most people have heard of this one, which is exactly why it's on the list. Number 12 isn't famous. It's not on the tourist trail. It's a hotel in a small coastal village in Northumberland. But according to specialist paranormal researchers, it may be the most haunted hotel in Britain. Not most famous, most haunted. The Schooner Hotel sits in Alnmouth, right on the Northumberland coast. It began life as a coaching inn, the kind of place travellers stopped at when they were crossing some of the most remote and windswept countryside in England. Over the years, it accumulated a history that includes smuggling, at least one murder, and several suicides on the premises. Researchers who have documented paranormal reports from across Britain have logged more than 60 separate spirit accounts at the Schooner. 60. Not 60 sightings, 60 different entities described by different people over many years. The most disturbing is room 28. According to local tradition, a family was massacred in that room. Guests who stay there report hearing children crying in the night, footsteps that cross the room with nobody attached to them, full apparitions, solid figures that vanish when approached. The cries of children are the part that people can't shake. Every account says the same thing. The crying sounds completely real, and then it stops. I'll be honest, most places on a list like this I'd happily visit. A grand castle, a stately home. Even with a ghost or two in the mix, you're surrounded by history and daylight and other tourists. Room 28 at the Schooner Hotel? I'd need considerably more persuading. Something about 60 reported spirits and the sounds of children crying in the night don't exactly scream relaxing weekend getaway. On the shore of Loch Fyne, one of the most beautiful stretches of water in Scotland, there is a building that was specifically designed to make people suffer. That's not an exaggeration. That was the point of it. Inverary Jail opened in 1820 on the edge of Loch Fyne in Argyll. It was a working prison for over a century. The county jail for Argyllshire, where men, women, and sometimes children were held in conditions that would horrify us today. Isolation, hard labour, near silence enforced around the clock, floggings, punishments designed not just to detain but to break. The jail is a visitor attraction now. You can walk through the cells, sit in the courtroom, learn what prison life was like in Victorian Scotland. And many of those who visit report that something of that suffering hasn't quite gone. Cold presences in the cells, the sense of being watched from the darkened wings, sounds that don't belong to the tour group making its way around. Paranormal investigators who spent the night at Inverary describe it as relentlessly active. A building that feels as though it's still full, long after the last prisoner was released. I think there's something about prisons specifically that lends itself to this. Thousands of people passed through these walls in fear and misery and desperation. If places hold onto emotions, and nobody can prove they do, but nobody can prove they don't, a working Victorian jail seems like the kind of building that would hold on very tightly. We've talked about this pattern in previous parts of the series. A ghost gets reported in a specific part of a room. For years, sometimes centuries, people describe the same thing in the same place. And then one day, someone opens a wall or lifts the floors and finds something physically underneath. The Roman road at Mizemore Hall, the bones of the Blue Boy at Chillingham, the skeleton at Lyme Park. Crath's Castle is another one, and the timing of the discovery still gives people pause. Crath's Castle sits near Banchory, on the banks of the River Dee in Aberdeenshire. It's a National Trust for Scotland property now, open to the public. The townhouse at its core was built by the Burnett family, who began construction in 1553. One of the family's most prized possessions is the Horn of Leys, a carved ivory horn given to them by Robert the Bruce himself back in 1323, still on display at the castle today. For as long as anyone could remember, visitors to one particular room at Craith's had reported the same experience. A young woman in a green robe, always in the same room, always there for a moment, then gone. She became known simply as the Green Lady, believed to be the ghost of a servant girl or a ward of the laird who had vanished after giving birth to a child, the baby's fate unknown. In the 1800s, during renovation work, builders opened up the area around the fireplace in that room. Behind it, they found skeletal remains, a woman and an infant. Nobody knows who they were. Nobody knows how they got there. The castle doesn't know. The records don't say. What the records do say is that the Green Lady was long reported there before anyone even opened up the fireplace. Long before anyone even knew what was on the opposite side of that wall. If you're the kind of person that needs a rational explanation for everything, Craith's Castle would like a word with you. Number 9 was built by prisoners of war. It held the Domesday Book during World War I. It executed 55 people in public, with thousands of spectators, some of them arriving by train specifically to watch. One of its cells was sealed during a renovation because the builders refused to go back inside it. It is now a boutique hotel. You can book a room. Bodmin Jail was built in 1779 on the edge of Bodmin Moor in Cornwall. French prisoners from the Napoleonic Wars were put to work hauling 20,000 tons of Cornish granite to construct it. It was, for its time, considered progressive. One of the first British prisons to house inmates in individual cells rather than throwing everyone together in one filthy room. Over the next 150 years, the progressive ideals faded. The jail expanded, it overcrowded, and it executed. William and James Lightfoot were hanged here in 1840 for murder. More than 25,000 people turned up to watch. Around 1,100 of them did it from the windows of a special train that stopped beside the gallows. Matthew Weeks was executed here in 1844 for the murder of his girlfriend Charlotte Diamond, whose body was found on Bodmin Moor. Doubt has since been cast on whether he actually did it. His ghost is said to still wander the jail, pleading his innocence. And then there's Selina Wadge, the last woman hanged at Bodmin Jail in 1878, convicted of murdering her disabled young son. She was led out clutching a white handkerchief. Her final words, recorded by witnesses at the time, were, "Lord, deliver me from this miserable world." Her body was left hanging for an hour, then buried in the prison grounds. Visitors to the upper floors today, particularly pregnant women, for reasons nobody understands, report being suddenly overwhelmed with grief, with guilt, with a sadness that doesn't belong to them and that lifts the moment they leave the building. Then there's Cell 4. During the 2019 renovation, builders working in that cell reported experiences disturbing enough that they stopped working and refused to go back. The cell was sealed up. Guests at the hotel that now occupies part of the building report the door opening by itself, being shoved by something they can't see, feeling hands around their throat. The cell is still sealed. 55 people executed. One cell sealed shut by builders too frightened to finish the job. And you can stay the night for the price of a hotel room. I don't know if that's brave or mad. Possibly both. Rainham Hall is a Grade 1 listed country house in Norfolk, still owned by the Townsend family, still a private residence. It is not open to the public. You cannot visit. The ghost associated with it is known as the Brown Lady, believed to be the spirit of Lady Dorothy Walpole, sister of Britain's first Prime Minister, Sir Robert Walpole. Dorothy died at Rainham Hall in 1726. The legend holds that her husband, Lord Townsend, had her confined to the hall after discovering she had a relationship before their marriage. That she spent the last years essentially a prisoner in her own home. That her death, officially reported as smallpox, may have been something different. Sightings of the Brown Lady began not long after Dorothy died, and they continued for the next 2 centuries. In 1835, author Captain Frederick Marryat was a guest at the hall and claimed to encounter her in a corridor. He drew his pistol and fired at the apparition. The shot passed through it. She was gone. Then came September 1936. 2 photographers, Captain Hubert Provand and Andres Shearer, arrived at Rainham Hall to shoot it for the Country Life magazine. They were professionals with professional equipment. On 19th September, Shearer was looking through the viewfinder of his camera, pointing down the main staircase, and he saw something on the stairs. A figure, translucent, moving. He screamed at Provand to take the picture. Provand took it blind. He couldn't see what Shearer was pointing at. He exposed the plate. When it was developed, the figure was there, a shrouded shape on the staircase, lit from within by something that had no source. The image was published on the cover of Country Life magazine on 26th of December 1936, and it circulated the world overnight. Skeptics have argued double exposure, light leakage, photographic artifact. It could have been any of those things. Provand and Shearer said it was none of them. They maintained that position until they died. The photograph has never been fully debunked. Nobody has ever produced a clean, definitive explanation for what that figure on the staircase is. For 90 years, it has sat in the files of Country Life magazine, the most credible outlet you could possibly publish a ghost photograph in, and it remains unanswered. Whether it's a ghost or a trick of the lens, the image is extraordinary. And the house that produced it is still standing, still private, still closed to the world. Whatever the Brown Lady is, she's not taking visitors. If you've seen the 1995 BBC adaptation of Pride and Prejudice, the one with Colin Firth emerging from a lake, you've seen Lime Park. That's Pemberley, the grandest house Firth's Mr. Darcy could possibly own. In real life, Lime Park belongs to the National Trust, and beneath its floors, they found a skeleton. Lime Park sits on the western edge of the Peak District in Cheshire. The Leigh family held it for nearly 550 years, from 1398 until 1946, when the third Baron Newton gave it to the National Trust because he could no longer afford to keep it. The National Trust restored it, opened it, and began the painstaking work of preserving a house that had accumulated 6 centuries of history. During that restoration, they opened up a room that the house had always called the Ghost Room. Beneath the floorboards, they found a skeleton. A man, believed to have been a Catholic priest, hidden there during the Tudor period when Catholic priests in England were hunted, tortured, and killed for their faith. He had gone into hiding and never came out. The room is still called the Ghost Room, but the older haunting at Lime Park is outdoors. Sir Piers Leigh was a member of the family who fought at the Battle of Agincourt in 1415 and is buried beneath a mound on the estate called Knight's Low. He was married, but he was also loved by a French woman named Blanche, who never recovered when she heard of his death. They found Blanche's body in a meadow on the estate. The meadow is still called Lady's Grave. On stormy nights, according to centuries of local legend, a ghostly funeral procession winds its way toward the Knight's Low, and a woman in white follows behind it, wailing. 3 people were once arrested for trespassing on the Lime Park estate at night, separately, without knowing about each other. When the police took their statements, all 3 had described the same white figure, every detail matching. The skeleton under the floor of Pemberley, a woman who grieved herself to death for a man who fought in Agincourt and is now buried in the back garden. Lime Park isn't just beautiful. It's layered with exactly the kind of history that refuses to stay quiet. This one is a ghost story about a ghost story. Because the most interesting thing about Bisham Abbey's haunting isn't the ghost. It's what the ghost tells us about the woman she's supposed to be. And what it tells us is that sometimes a legend is a lie. A lie told about a real person. A lie that outlived them by 400 years. Bisham Abbey sits beside the River Thames near Marlow in Berkshire. Today it's a national sports centre. England football trained here for 40 years. Barcelona has trained here. Portsmouth FC prepared here before winning the 2008 FA Cup. But long before the athletes arrived, there was Dame Elizabeth Hobby. Elizabeth was born in 1528 and died in 1609. She lived to 81. She was one of the most educated women at the court of Elizabeth I. She spoke Latin, she wrote poetry, she played music. She was a respected, accomplished woman of fierce intellectual standards who spent her life in positions of genuine influence and prestige. Her portrait still hangs in the Great Hall of Bisham Abbey. And somewhere along the way, in the 19th century, long after she was dead, a story emerged. That Elizabeth Hobby had a son called William who kept blotting his copybook. That she was so enraged by his poor work that she beat him to death. That she now wanders Bisham Abbey, washing the blood from her hands in a bowl of water that appears before her, weeping, unable to stop. Here's the problem. There was no son called William. Historians checked. Elizabeth Hobby's 2 sons, Edward and Thomas, both lived to adulthood with no record of harm coming to either of them. The murdered child never existed. In 1840, someone claimed to have found old copybooks hidden in the walls of the abbey with heavy blotting on the pages. The proof of the legend. But the man who publicised the story admitted he never personally saw these books. Their whereabouts have never been established. And yet, Admiral Edward Vansittart, a naval officer, was playing chess late one night in the panelled room at Bisham beneath Elizabeth's portrait. His companion went to bed. He stood alone with his back to the painting. He sensed something behind him and turned. Dame Elizabeth was standing there, solid, real. He looked at the portrait. The canvas was blank, empty. He ran. a young man sleeping at the abbey during the Henley Regatta felt fingers in his hair. He woke up to find Dame Hobby beside him. She whispered, "Young man, if I touch thee, thou wilt be bald." A woman murdered by Victorian gossip, haunting a building she spent her life in, not as a murderer, but as the accomplished scholar she actually was. The ghost doesn't even match the legend. And England football trained here for 40 years without, as far as we know, anyone being warned about Dame Elizabeth before a big match. There are castles in Britain with dark histories, and then there's Dunnottar. This is a place where a king was killed in a Viking raid, where William Wallace set fire to a chapel with English soldiers trapped inside, where an entire religious community was imprisoned in a single vault until many of them died, where a handful of defenders held out against Oliver Cromwell's army long enough to smuggle a nation's crown jewels out through the siege lines. It is a ruin now, on a cliff above the North Sea, and it feels like every single thing that ever happened there is still happening. Dunnottar Castle sits on a rocky headland on the Aberdeenshire coast, surrounded on three sides by the North Sea. The only way in is across a narrow strip of land, through a gate, and down into the castle itself. The cliffs fall away 200 feet to the water below. People have lived and fought and died on this rock for over 1,000 years. The site was first recorded in the written record in AD 681. In AD 900, a Scottish king, Donald II, was killed here defending it against Viking invaders. In 1297, William Wallace took it from an English garrison in a daring assault. The English soldiers, terrified of what would happen to them, fled into the stone chapel. They believed the Scots wouldn't kill them on holy ground. According to the legend, Wallace set fire to the chapel anyway. In 1651, with Cromwell's armies sweeping through Scotland, a tiny garrison at Dunnottar held out under siege for 8 months, long enough for the Scottish crown jewels, the honours of Scotland, the nation's oldest royal regalia, to be quietly passed out through the lines and hidden under the floor of a nearby church. They survived. They're at Edinburgh Castle today. And in 1685, over 160 men, women, and possibly children were packed into a single underground vault at Dunnottar and left there. Their crime? Refusing to accept the religious reforms imposed by Charles II. The conditions were brutal. Many died in that vault. The castle's deputy custodian, Martin Gray, was quoted on record as saying, "People say they feel a presence in the brewery." The brewery is where the Green Lady is seen. A woman in a green gown, standing, watching. Some believe she's Pictish, that ancient, that old, that she's been here since before the first stone was laid. There's also a tall figure seen near the guardroom, described by multiple witnesses as Scandinavian-looking, possibly the ghost of a Viking who came here to fight and never left. And at night, from the direction of the vault where the Covenanters were held, cries have been reported, voices in pain. Dunnottar has been used as a film location for Hamlet and Victor Frankenstein, which tells you everything about the kind of atmosphere the place projects. It is a ruin. It is on a cliff. It is one of the most historically intense places I've ever read about, and the ghosts here, if ghosts they are, seem to reach back not centuries but millennia. The Green Lady of Dunnottar might be the oldest ghost in Britain. In 2002, the landlady of a pub in South Wales decided to sell up. She'd lived there for 11 years, and enough was enough. She put the pub on the market, and the moment viewing started, glasses began flying around the kitchen. Not falling, flying. Every time a potential buyer came through the door. She told the BBC about it, on camera. The pub didn't sell easily. The Skirrid Mountain Inn stands in the village of Llanfihangel Crockeney in Monmouthshire, just north of Abergavenny in the shadow of the mountain that gives it its name. It claims to be the oldest pub in Wales, first mentioned in records in 1110, though archaeologists who examined the current building found it's mostly 17th century construction. There may well have been an inn on this site for 900 years, but what stands now was largely built in the 1600s. And in the 1600s, the upper floor was used as a courthouse. The oak beam that runs across the staircase is said to bear the marks of a rope, the beam from which criminals were hanged. How many? The legend says around 180. The historical records are silent on this. No documentation of individual trials or executions at the inn has been found, but the beam is real. The marks are real, and the atmosphere is real. People who walk up that staircase feel it, a tightening around the throat, a pressure that shouldn't be there. Fanny Price was the landlady here in the 19th century. She worked at the inn for years and died here in 1875 of tuberculosis, aged 35. She's buried in the churchyard just up the road. Her room, number 3, is said to be where she's most often felt. People report a scent of lavender when nobody has brought any into the building. And then there's the bath. A female guest once ran downstairs in wet hair and nothing but a coat. She was screaming. She said something had held her head underwater in the bath. Held it there. Something she couldn't see. The former owner confirmed the incident publicly. Ghost stories from pubs are almost always charming. A friendly presence behind the bar, a Victorian barmaid, a local regular who never quite left. The Skirrid is not that kind of ghost story. The Skirrid is the kind where guests are physically restrained underwater and the landlady's furniture flies around the kitchen to stop her selling. It's still a functioning pub. You can get a drink. You can book a room. I strongly suggest you don't take a bath. I've got a ghost story for you now that involves a family coat of arms, a secret passage, a trapped animal, and the scratching sound behind panelling that visitors to a Dorset manor house have been hearing for about 500 years. It is, I think, one of the strangest ghost stories in this entire series. Athelhampton House was built in 1485 by Sir William Martin, Lord Mayor of London. It's one of the finest surviving Tudor manor houses in England, Grade 1 listed, open to the public year-round, and still carrying, inside its walls, 11 documented ghostly presences, including a phantom ape. The Martin family had a crest. On it, a chained ape, looking at itself in a mirror. The motto, "He who looks at Martin's ape shall look at him." Nicholas Martin, the last of the male line, died in 1595. The family had kept a pet ape, a real one, imported and apparently much loved. According to the house's own account of what happened, one of the Martin daughters was in distress one day and slipped into a concealed passage behind the panelling in the great chamber to hide. She didn't know the ape had followed her in. When she left, it couldn't find its way out. The passage sealed behind it, and the ape starved to death inside the walls of Athelhampton House. The ghost of Martin's ape has been reported ever since. Not seen, heard. A scratching from behind the panelling in the great chamber, frantic, rhythmic, the sound of something trying to desperately get out. But there are other presences too. The Grey Lady, a spectral woman who has appeared to multiple witnesses over centuries. In 1966, a housemaid thought she was asking a visitor who'd stayed past closing time to leave. The woman crossed the room, walked into the panelling, and was gone. The Phantom Duelists, 2 men who erupted into the Great Hall mid-sword fight while a woman tried to read. She rang for the servants, nobody came. She watched the fight, 1 man cut on the arm, and then it was over. She reported it to the owner. He had no explanation. And a ghost cooper who taps away in the wine cellar, a barrel maker who clearly cannot stop working. Athelhampton House was the very first episode of Most Haunted, back in 2002, which tells you something about its reputation. It was sold in 2019 for £7 million, and the new owner inherited the Phantom Ape, the Grey Lady, the Duelists, and the tapping from the wine cellar. That is an extraordinary number of things to get in a property sale. In the summer of 1890, a man arrived in the Yorkshire seaside town of Whitby for a holiday. He was a theatre manager who needed a rest. He was working on a novel set in Austria about a character he'd decided to call Count Vampire. He never visited Austria. He never visited Transylvania. But what he found in Whitby changed the story, and changed everything. Bram Stoker arrived in Whitby in late July 1890 and stayed at a guest house on Royal Crescent. The blue plaque marking the building is still there, and from the windows of that guest house, he looked out across the harbour every morning at one of the most dramatic ruins in England. Whitby Abbey stands on the East Cliff headland, high above the town, silhouetted against the northern sea sky. It was founded in the year 657 by a Northumbrian king who appointed a woman, Lady Hilda, as its first abbess. It survived centuries of conflict, was destroyed by Vikings, rebuilt, destroyed again by Henry VIII, and has stood in ruins ever since. In 1914, the German Navy shelled Whitby from the sea. You can still see the damage in the stone. Stoker walked through the churchyard below the abbey. He sat on the benches where locals told him ghost stories. He wandered down the public library where he found a book by a British consul about Romanian folklore, and in it, a 15th century prince known as Vlad the Impaler, who was referred to by a title that meant Son of the Dragon. In Valachilian dialect, that word was Dracula. He had his name. He had his setting: the ruined abbey on the cliff, the 199 stone steps, the harbour where ships came in from the sea. A real ship called the Dimitri had run aground at Whitby in a storm 5 years earlier. Stoker made it into the Demeter, arriving with a dead crew and a cargo of earth-filled boxes. In 1897, Dracula was published, and Whitby, which until then had been a pleasant Yorkshire fishing town, became something else entirely. The abbey's own ghost predates Stoker by centuries. Constance de Beverley was a nun who broke her vows for love overnight. When she was discovered, her fellow nuns walled her up alive inside the abbey. Her cries, according to the legend, can still be heard on certain nights. Stoker read this story. He put it in the book. Minamuri's diary, in Dracula, mentions a white lady seen in one of the abbey windows, a legend that existed long before the novel. In 2022, to celebrate the 125th anniversary of Dracula, 1,369 people arrived at Whitby Abbey dressed as vampires, a Guinness World Record. Without Whitby, there is no Dracula. Without the abbey on the cliff, no shipwreck scene. Without the 199 steps, no Dracula bounding up them in the form of a dog. Without the local ghost stories Stoker collected in that churchyard, no Minamuri, no Lucy Westenra, no Count. From a pub in Wales where guests are held underwater in the bath, to a Scottish cliff-top castle haunted by a woman who may be older than recorded history. From a Norfolk hall that refused to be photographed without showing you something unexpected, to a Yorkshire abbey that gave the world its most famous vampire. The thing that connects all of these, every single one, is that real things happened in them. Real deaths, real suffering, real moments of cruelty, grief, and injustice so powerful that they seem to have left a mark on the physical world. Whether that mark takes the form of a ghost, a story, or a photograph that nobody can explain, maybe the line between those things is thinner than we think. If any of you want to visit these places, and I think you should, I'll link them all in the description. Links to part 1 and 2 will also be there if you haven't seen those. If this video kept you up past midnight, good. It means we're doing something right. Subscribe, hit the bell, and I'll see you for the next one. Sleep well.